I signed my name on the divorce papers while 30 people watched me from across the conference room table, and I didn't say a single word. My hand didn't shake. My eyes didn't water. I just signed, slid the papers back across the polished wood, and stood up. Richard's lawyer smiled like he'd just won the lottery. Richard himself leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. His mother whispered something to his sister, both of them staring at me like I was a stray dog finally being put out on the street. "That's it then," Richard's attorney said, gathering the documents with thick, confident fingers. "Mrs. Castellano, or I should say, Ms. Hartley now, you'll receive the agreed-upon settlement within 48 hours, $25,000. I trust that's satisfactory. $25,000. After 12 years of marriage to one of the wealthiest tech moguls in the country. After I gave up my career, my friends, my entire life to support his rise from a struggling startup founder to a billionaire. After I smiled through 1,000 business dinners, hosted events for investors I didn't know, and pretended not to notice when he started coming home later and later, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. "It's satisfactory," I said quietly. Richard actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that made everyone else in the room relax. His mother smiled. His sister pulled out her phone. The lawyers started packing their briefcases. They all thought I'd given up. They all thought I was broken. "I have to admit, Julia," Richard said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket, "I expected more of a fight. Thought you'd at least try to take me for more. But I guess you finally realized you never really belonged in this world anyway." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The man I'd loved since we were both 23, working late nights in his cramped apartment while he coded and I organized his business plans. The man who'd promised me the world once he made it big. The man who forgot every promise the moment success arrived. "I realized a lot of things, Richard," I said. "But mostly, I realized when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them." He frowned, confused by my calm tone. But before he could respond, I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. His attorney called after me, reminding me about some final paperwork. Yeah, but I just kept walking, down the hallway, into the elevator, out of the building that Richard owned, the building where we'd celebrated his first billion-dollar deal, the building where I'd once felt like a queen. Now I felt like a ghost. And maybe that's exactly what I needed to be. The hotel room I checked into that night cost $43. It smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. The bed creaked when I sat down. I stared at the wall for maybe 2 hours, not crying, not thinking, just existing in the strange, empty space between one life and the next. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from people who'd heard about the divorce. Most of them were people I'd thought were friends, but their messages gave them away immediately. "OMG, Julia, are you okay? Do you need money? I heard about the settlement." Well, that's so unfair. Richard is such a jerk. "If you need a place to stay, my guest room is available. It's small, but it's something." Every single message dripped with pity. With that particular kind of satisfaction people get when someone else falls from grace. I deleted them all without responding. There was only one message I read twice. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "The car will arrive tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring nothing. Everything you need will be provided." It's time to come home. I should have been scared. I should have questioned it. But somewhere deep in my chest, underneath all the numbness, something stirred. Something that felt almost like hope. The next morning, I wore the same clothes I'd worn to sign the divorce papers. A simple black dress, flat shoes, no jewelry. I checked out of the hotel at 8:30 and stood on the curb with my single suitcase, watching cars pass by in the California sunshine. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled up. The driver stepped out, an older man in a crisp uniform, and opened the back door without saying a word. I hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, then got in. We drove for 40 minutes, away from the city, toward the hills where the truly wealthy lived. Not wealthy like Richard, nouveau riche, still trying to prove something. No, we drove toward old money, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. We passed through 3 security checkpoints. The car climbed higher and higher, until finally we arrived at a private airstrip I didn't even know existed. And there, gleaming in the morning sun, was a jet. Not a private plane. A jet, the kind that billionaires use to fly between continents. The driver opened my door. "Someone's waiting for you inside, Miss Hartley." I stepped out, my heart pounding now, confusion and curiosity warring in my chest. The stairs were already lowered. A flight attendant in an elegant uniform stood at the top, smiling. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs. And when I stepped into the cabin, everything in my world shifted. Sitting in one of the leather seats, reading a newspaper and sipping coffee like this was the most normal thing in the world, was a man I hadn't seen in person for 15 years. "Hello, Julia," my father said. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father set down his newspaper and stood, and I saw that he'd aged, that his hair was completely white now, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, kind. "I know you have questions," he said gently. "Sit down. We have a long flight ahead of us." "Dad," I finally managed, my voice cracking, "you're supposed to be dead." He smiled sadly. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But it was necessary. Please sit. Let me explain." I collapsed into the seat across from him, my mind spinning. My father had died when I was 19. Car accident. Closed casket funeral. I'd grieved for years. My mother had grieved until her own death 5 years later. We'd had nothing after he died. His business had collapsed. Debts had piled up. We'd lost everything. Or so I'd thought. "The business didn't fail," my father said, as if reading my mind. "It was stolen from me. By people with more power, more connections, more willingness to destroy anyone in their way. They came after me, Julia. They threatened you. They threatened your mother. So I made a choice. I faked my death, took a settlement that bought your safety, and disappeared. For 15 years, my voice rose. You let us think you were dead for 15 years? I had no choice, he said, and there was real pain in his voice now. They were watching you, both of you. If I'd made contact, if I'd given any sign I was alive, they would have come for you again. So, I rebuilt, quietly, carefully, under different names, through different channels. I built an empire that makes the one they stole from me look like pocket change. And I waited. Waited for what? For you to need me, he said simply. I've been watching you, Julia. I know you married Richard Castellano. I know he climbed his way to success on ideas that weren't entirely his own. I know he betrayed you. And I know that yesterday you signed divorce papers that gave you almost nothing while he kept billions. Tears were streaming down my face now. You've been watching me this whole time? You knew everything and you never... I wanted to reach out 1,000 times, he interrupted, leaning forward. Every time I saw you struggling, every time Richard treated you like you were beneath him, every time his family looked at you like you were nothing. But I couldn't. Not until you were free of him. Because what I'm about to give you, what I'm about to show you, has to be yours, not his, not anyone else's. Yours. The jet engine started. We were moving now, taxiing toward the runway. Where are we going? I whispered. Home, my father said. Your real home. The one you should have inherited a long time ago. We landed 8 hours later in Switzerland. A convoy of cars met us at the private terminal. My father guided me into the first one, and we drove through Geneva's pristine streets, past banks and luxury shops and pristine parks, until we reached a building that looked more like a palace than an office. Inside, men and women in expensive suits greeted my father with obvious respect. He was introduced to me as Victor Hartley. And I realized, with a shock, that I'd heard that name before. Victor Hartley, one of the most powerful private investors in Europe. A ghost in the financial world, never photographed, rarely named, but rumored to control stakes in dozens of major corporations. My dead father was Victor Hartley. We took an elevator to the top floor. My father's office overlooked the entire city, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the Alps in the distance. He gestured for me to sit, then opened a folder on his desk. Everything I've built over the last 15 years is documented here, he said. Companies, investments, properties, assets. Current estimated worth is approximately $47 billion. I stopped breathing. As of today, he continued calmly, 50% of everything transfers to you. The other 50% remains in trust to be transferred upon my death. But effective immediately, you are one of the wealthiest women in the world. I can't. You can, he said firmly. You've earned this, Julia. Not because you're my daughter, though that would be reason enough, but because I watched you build Richard's empire. I watched you turn his scattered ideas into coherent business strategies. I watched you network, negotiate, organize. You have a brilliant mind for business. You just never got credit for it. He pushed a document across the desk. This is your new identity in the business world. Julia Hartley Castellano is the owner of Hartley Victor Enterprises. That's you. You have full control. My team will support you, advise you, but the decisions are yours. I picked up the document with shaking hands, my name, my face, but underneath, a list of holdings that made my head spin. Tech companies, real estate, media, pharmaceuticals. There's something else, my father said, and now his voice had an edge to it. 3 years ago, I started buying shares in Castellano Technologies. Quietly. Through shell companies and third-party investors. I now own 38% of Richard's company. You, as of this morning, own another 13% through various trusts and investments I arranged. Together, we control 51%. I looked up at him, understanding dawning. Richard doesn't know, I whispered. Richard has no idea, my father confirmed. He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he built everything himself. He thinks divorcing you was the smartest move he ever made. And in 3 days, there's a board meeting where several major decisions will be made. Decisions about the future direction of the company. Decisions that Richard believes he controls. But he doesn't. No, my father smiled. He doesn't. I spent the next 2 days learning everything about my new life. My father's team, my team now, walked me through every asset, every investment, every holding. They showed me properties I owned in Paris, Tokyo, New York. They explained complicated financial structures and international tax laws. They treated me like I was already the person I was supposed to become. And slowly, somewhere in those 2 days, something inside me shifted. The broken woman who'd signed divorce papers in front of a room full of people who thought she was nothing started to fade away. In her place, someone stronger emerged. Someone who remembered that, before Richard, before the marriage, before the years of being diminished and dismissed, I'd been smart, capable, worthy. On the 3rd day, my father and I flew back to California. We landed at the same private airstrip where I'd first boarded the jet. But this time, I stepped off that plane as a completely different person. And Richard's board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Castellano Technologies headquarters. My father and I arrived at 1:55. I was wearing a suit that cost more than Richard's monthly car payment. My hair was styled. My makeup was perfect. I looked like exactly what I was: power. The security guard in the lobby didn't recognize me at first. Then his eyes widened. "Mrs. Cass, Mrs. Hartley," I corrected coolly, "and I'm expected." We took the elevator to the executive floor. Richard's assistant, Melissa, the same woman who'd been his mistress for the last 2 years, though Richard thought I didn't know, looked up from her desk and went pale. "Julia, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for the board meeting," I said calmly. That's a closed meeting. Shareholders only." "I know," I said, and walked past her toward the conference room doors. My father followed silently, a solid presence at my back. I pushed open the doors without knocking. The conference room fell silent. 12 people sat around the table. Richard at the head, obviously. His attorney, his CFO, his chief technology officer, and 8 board members, most of whom I'd met at various events over the years. Richard stood up so fast, his chair rolled backward. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I'm attending the board meeting," I said calmly, moving to an empty chair halfway down the table, "as is my right as a majority shareholder." "You're not a shareholder," Richard said, his voice sharp with confusion. "You don't own anything." "Actually," my father said, speaking for the first time, as he took the seat next to me, "she does. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Victor Hartley, primary shareholder of Hartley Victor Enterprises. My daughter and I collectively own 51% of Castellano Technologies, which means, effectively, we own you." The room erupted. Richard's face went from confused to pale to red in the space of 3 seconds. His attorney started frantically typing on his phone. The board members were looking at each other, at their own documents, trying to understand what was happening. "That's impossible," Richard finally managed. "I would have known. I would have been notified." "You were notified," one of the board members said quietly, a woman named Margaret Chen. "Multiple times over the last 3 years, whenever HVI Enterprises increased their position. But you dismissed it as just another investor." "Because they're just another investor," Richard shouted. "They don't control." "We do," I said, and my voice cut through his like a knife. We control 51%, which means we control the board, which means we control the company, which means every decision you make from this point forward requires our approval. Richard stared at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger. Julia, what are you doing? I'm taking what's mine, I said simply. You see, Richard, I've spent the last 3 days reviewing something interesting. Every major breakthrough your company ever made, every successful product launch, every innovative feature that made Castellano Technologies worth billions. They all happened when I was actively involved in your business. Kind of funny how that works. You were a housewife, he spat. You don't know anything about technology. I was your business strategist, I corrected. I was your project manager. I was the person who took your half-formed ideas and made them marketable. I was the person who networked with investors, while you were too socially awkward to make small talk. I was the person who organized your entire operation. And you know what? I have emails. I have documents. I have recorded conversations where you explicitly acknowledged my contributions before you decided I wasn't useful anymore. His face was white now. His attorney touched his arm, whispered something, but Richard shook him off. If you think you can take my company— I don't need to take it, I interrupted. I already own it. Now, I believe we have a board meeting to conduct. There are several items on the agenda, the first one being a vote on new executive leadership. Margaret Chen cleared her throat. I motion that we vote on the position of CEO. Given the new shareholder structure, I believe it's prudent to reconsider whether Mr. Castellano should remain in his current role. Seconded, another board member said immediately. Richard's face was purple now. You can't do this. I founded this company. I built this— You built it with Julia, my father said calmly. She just never got credit or compensation. That changes today. The vote was quick, 8-4, in favor of removing Richard as CEO. The 4 votes against were people who owed Richard personal favors, and even they looked uncomfortable. As majority shareholders, I said, standing up, my father and I propose a new CEO structure. Richard will remain on the board and retain the title of founder and chief technology officer. However, day-to-day operations and strategic decisions will now fall under new leadership. Who? Richard demanded. Who could possibly run this company better than me? I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Margaret Chen as CEO, and myself as Chief Strategy Officer. I believe my 12 years of experience building this company from the inside makes me uniquely qualified. Another vote, 10-2 this time. Richard stood there, his whole world crumbling around him, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. All in favor of the new leadership structure? Margaret said. Every hand except Richard's and 2 others went up. Motion carries, Margaret said. Meeting adjourned. The next hour was chaos. Richard's attorney tried to argue procedure. Richard himself tried to threaten legal action. But the board members who'd supported the change were solid. They'd been unhappy with Richard's leadership for years, apparently. His ego, his refusal to delegate, his increasingly erratic decision-making. They just needed someone else to take control first. That someone was me. By 5 p.m., new contracts were being drawn up. By 6 p.m., Richard had been escorted to his new office, smaller, windowless, no longer at the center of power. By 7 p.m., I was sitting in what used to be his office, in his chair, looking at his view. My father appeared in the doorway, How do you feel? Terrified, I admitted. And powerful. And angry. And... I paused. Satisfied. Good, he said. You should feel all of those things. But mostly, you should feel proud. You did this. Not me. Not revenge. You. You're the one who built this company. You're the one who earned this position. I just gave you the tools to claim it. There was a knock on the open door. Margaret Chen stood there, tablet in hand, looking professional and slightly amused. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but there's a situation downstairs. Richard's wife, his new wife, I should say, just arrived. She's demanding to speak to whoever's in charge. I raised an eyebrow. Richard had remarried fast. Some Instagram model 30 years younger than him, from what I'd heard. They'd been engaged within 3 months of our separation. Send her up, I said. Margaret looked surprised. You sure? Absolutely. Richard's new wife was exactly what I expected. 25 years old, wearing designer everything. Her face a perfect mask of cosmetic enhancement. She strutted into my office like she owned it, then stopped short when she saw me sitting behind the desk. Where's Richard? She demanded. In his office, I said calmly. Down the hall, 3rd door on the right. She looked confused. This is his office. This was his office, I corrected. Now it's mine. I'm the new Chief Strategy Officer. Richard has been reassigned. Her face twisted into something ugly. You can't do that. He owns this company. Actually, he doesn't, I said, but I do. Well, 51% of it anyway. And I made some changes today. She stood there, processing, and I could see the exact moment realization hit. The exact moment she understood that Richard wasn't the golden ticket she'd thought he was. How much is he worth now? She asked, so her voice smaller. Still wealthy by most standards, I said, but probably not wealthy enough for your lifestyle. Not anymore. Her eyes narrowed. You're doing this because you're jealous. Because he chose me over you. I laughed, actually laughed. Sweetheart, he didn't choose you. He chose an idea of what you represent. Youth, novelty, ego boost. And you didn't choose him. You chose his bank account. But here's the thing about choices. They have consequences. You're a bitter bitch, she spat. Maybe, I agreed. But I'm a bitter bitch with a $47 billion inheritance and control of this company. How are you doing? She left without another word, her designer heels clicking furiously down the hallway. Margaret appeared again a few minutes later. That was satisfying to watch. It really was, I admitted. Listen, Margaret said, sitting down across from me. I want you to know, a lot of us have been hoping for something like this for years. Richard had good ideas, but he was impossible to work with. Dismissed every suggestion that wasn't his own. Took credit for team efforts. Treated support staff like they were invisible. This company has been dying from the inside for a while. You might have just saved it. I don't want to save it for revenge, I said carefully. I want to save it because I actually built it. Because I care about the people who work here. Because I have ideas that could make it better. Margaret smiled. Then let's get started. The next 6 months were the hardest work of my life. I spent 12-hour days at the office, learning every detail of every department. I met with employees at every level. I restructured departments that weren't working. I fired executives who'd spent years protecting Richard's ego instead of serving the company. I hired new people with fresh ideas, And slowly, Castellano Technologies, which we rebranded as CT Industries after 4 months, began to transform. Richard, to his credit, didn't fight me publicly. He worked in his smaller office, focused on technology development, and stayed out of strategy meetings. But I heard, through the grapevine, that his new marriage was falling apart. His wife had left him after 2 months, citing fundamental misalignments about lifestyle expectations, which apparently meant he wasn't rich enough anymore. The gossip columns had a field day with it. The same columns that had mocked me 6 months earlier for walking away with nothing in the divorce. Now they ran pieces about the stunning rise of Julia Hartley and how one woman went from divorce to boardroom domination in 6 months. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. My work spoke for itself. 8 months after I signed those divorce papers, CT Industries held its annual shareholder meeting. It was the first one under new leadership, and everyone in the tech world was watching. I stood at the podium in a ballroom filled with investors, media, employees, and board members. Richard was in the audience, sitting near the back, his face carefully neutral. 8 months ago, I began, this company was worth approximately $8 billion. Today, after restructuring, new product launches, and strategic partnerships, we're valued at $12 billion. We've increased revenue by 30%, expanded into 3 new markets, and improved employee satisfaction scores by 42%. Applause rippled through the room. But numbers aren't the full story, I continued. The real story is about what happens when you build a company on respect instead of ego. When you listen to all voices, not just the loudest one. When you recognize that innovation comes from collaboration, not individual genius. I paused, looking directly at Richard. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Not anger, not resentment, just acceptance, maybe even respect. I want to acknowledge Richard Castellano, I said, the founder of this company. He had the original vision. He had the technical skill. He built the foundation. But foundations are meant to be built upon. And that's what we're doing now. Building something bigger, stronger, and more sustainable than any one person could create alone. More applause. Richard nodded slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. We'd never have that. But it was acknowledgement. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. After the meeting, my father found me in the hallway outside the ballroom. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "I'm proud of me too," I admitted. "I never thought I could do this. Be this." "I always knew," he said. "From the time you were little, you had this fire in you. Richard didn't put it out. He just made you forget it was there. All I did was give you the resources to remember." "What happens now?" I asked. He smiled. "Whatever you want. You're one of the most powerful women in the tech industry. You have resources, connections, influence, so the world is open to you in ways it never was before." I said slowly, I want to help other women who are where I was, who've given up careers for relationships, who've been diminished and dismissed. I want to create programs, mentorships, funding. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't have to happen to anyone else. "Then that's what you'll do," my father said, "because you can." 1 year after I signed those divorce papers, I stood on the same private airstrip where this all began. But this time, I wasn't arriving. I was leaving. The jet behind me was mine now. one of three I owned. And I was heading to New York to meet with a group of investors interested in my new venture, a foundation that provided resources and business training to women exiting difficult marriages. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Congratulations on everything you've built. You were right about all of it. I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. R. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to respond with something cutting, something that would remind him of every hurt, every humiliation, every moment he'd made me feel small. But the truth was, I didn't need to. Richard wasn't the villain of my story anymore. He wasn't the hero either. He was just a person, someone who'd made mistakes, someone who'd lost something valuable because he couldn't see its worth until it was gone. I deleted the message without responding and boarded my jet. Because the real ending to this story wasn't about Richard realizing what he'd lost. It wasn't about revenge or even justice, though I'd gotten both. The real ending was about me realizing what I'd gained. I gained myself back. The version of me who'd existed before. I'd learned to make myself smaller, to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. The version who knew her worth, knew her mind, knew her power. I signed those divorce papers quietly, letting everyone think I was defeated. I let them believe I was broken. I let them dismiss me. And then I built an empire, not for revenge, not to prove anything to Richard or his family or anyone who doubted me, but for myself, because I could, because I deserved it, because sometimes the best justice isn't about making someone else fall. It's about learning to rise. As the jet lifted off, I looked out the window at California shrinking below me. Somewhere down there, Richard was in his smaller office, working on technology projects, living a smaller life. His new wife had left. His company was no longer his. His empire had been absorbed into something bigger, something he no longer controlled. And somewhere down there, in a cramped hotel that cost $43 a night, a woman had once sat on a creaky bed and wondered if her life was over. She was wrong. Her life was just beginning. I pulled out my laptop and opened the proposal for the foundation. There was so much work to do, so many women to help, so many lives to change. The flight attendant brought me coffee. I thanked her. I thought about my father, about the 15 years he'd spent in silence, building something strong enough to support me when I needed it most. I thought about second chances, about hidden truths, about the way life can change in a single moment, if you're brave enough to let it. And I thought about that conference room, where I'd signed my name while 30 people watched, where Richard had smirked, where his lawyer had gathered documents with confident hands, where everyone had believed they'd won. They were so sure I was walking away with nothing. They had no idea I was walking away with everything. If you've made it this far, I want to hear from you. Do you think justice was served? Was this revenge, or was it something else? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button. And if you want more stories about people who were underestimated, dismissed, and written off, but came back stronger, subscribe. Because trust me, we're just getting started. Sometimes the quietest signature makes the loudest statement. And sometimes the person everyone thinks lost already won.